Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Q&A section of the Egyptian video series. I wanted to put this last video together because basically I had several people ask me questions about traveling, particularly traveling to this area of the world, and what my experiences were. And so I thought what I would do would be to solicit your feedback or your questions and then put together a video, because I'm sure that many people have similar questions or interests and wanted to find out. So I thought this would be a really good way to communicate some of the information that I experienced and some of the misinformation that's really out there when traveling to really any international country, but particularly this area of the world. So let me go ahead and start with a question that was actually asked by a couple different people in various forms. And question number one was, what was the attitude towards Americans from the locals? I can't stress enough that the Egyptian people to me were great. They were extremely wonderful. They're very friendly. In fact, many of them actually thought I was from England just because I spoke English, and I had a hard time understanding that at first, because I thought, well, surely they would recognize my accent as not being an English accent, but the reality is I do have an accent to them, and I was speaking English, so a lot of people thought that I was from England. And when I told them that I was from America, they were even more surprised, because on the whole, Americans do not travel into that region very, very often or in large numbers. So they were extremely nice, extremely friendly. Never once did I feel uncomfortable about it. I can only say that their attitude towards me and their requests that I come home and share with the rest of America that Egypt's a wonderful place to visit, and they're very, very welcome, and they would love to have more travelers come to see their country. They're very, very hospitable and very welcoming. One other point to that I would say would be the things that you're hearing on news media and the things that you might be reading in newsprint. Do not believe it. It's all nonsense. It's either written or reported by somebody who's never experienced the culture, never traveled there, or they've handpicked or cherry-picked individuals that support their narrative and are going to paint a very, very bleak picture. I would suggest, if you don't want to take my word for it, I would suggest that you look at other travelers on YouTube and their videos about traveling to those countries and see what their experiences are, because that's what reality is, not what the mainstream medias or cable news or the New York Times or any of these other things are going to tell you. Absolutely do your own research and make your own, draw your own conclusions. Do not accept the word of the American media in any way. Second question, was it scary traveling with all this unrest in the world? Also, have I ever thought that my life was ever in danger? Truth be known, most of the unrest in the world resides in this country currently. There are some other hotspots in the world, certainly. I'm not going to pretend that there are not, and there are places that I certainly right now, in good judgment, would not travel to, given perhaps civil unrest. But overall, I think a lot of the unrest is residing within this country in many forms, currently being disguised as protests or whatever you want to call it right now. But the truth is, I feel much safer walking the streets of downtown Cairo than I would of downtown Chicago or Seattle or some of these other cities that have kind of erupted into a lot of unrest. Having said that, I don't think I can remember ever a time, whether it was walking through the streets of Beijing or Lhasa in China, in Moscow, and in Cairo, and even areas where I was at in the Sinai Peninsula, which there are pockets that right now are deemed to be unsafe, but in no time did I ever feel or get the impression that my life might be in danger or I was taking any unnecessary risks. Good question, though. Question 3. What cultural research did I do before the start of my trip? I think it's extremely important whenever you take a trip, even if you're just taking something domestic, going to another city within your own country. It's really a good idea to learn a little bit or to learn as much as you can about where you're going to. Not only does it enhance your experience, but it also gives you the ability to sort of guide where you want to focus your time there and things that you may want to see. For this particular trip and for several of the other adventures that I've taken, I took a tremendous amount of time to research the areas that I was going to. And originally I was going to Jordan and Israel as well, and unfortunately that portion of the trip wasn't able to pan out because the borders being closed. So I had to shift at the last minute and sort of do some more research into areas of Egypt that I was going to. But I think the number one thing that you can start with when you're going to another country, particularly something like this, where the predominant faith or religion is something beyond maybe what you're experiencing with, or used to with Christianity or any of the things that might be, very predominant here at home. So I start in that area. I know that when I went to China a couple of years ago, I did a lot more, even though the official religious stance in China is atheism. There's still a tremendous amount of Confucianism. And as you go west into the western part of the country and into Tibet, it becomes a much greater Buddhist concept. So I wanted to learn as much as I could about it, just about some of the tenets and things, making sure that I didn't do anything that would be considered offensive, having an understanding of it. But also from a historical perspective, when you demonstrate that you've taken the time to learn about someone else's culture, it really ingratiates yourself to them and will enhance the experience so much greater. You'll be treated so much differently if you go over there with a little bit of an understanding. They don't expect you to know the language completely. They don't expect you to know the thousands of years of history. But if you demonstrate to them that you've done some work into learning about their culture and their lifestyles, you will be treated so much differently. I can't stress that enough. One of the things that I did was do a lot of YouTube video research on those particular countries and watched others' experiences. That to me was by far the greatest help in understanding, and again, it helped me understand or give me an idea of the things that I wanted to see, and taught me some things that I might not have known initially, and how to handle myself, how to deal with things like local transportation, taxis, things like I would have never known that there was Uber in Cairo. And it turned out that Uber was just incredibly inexpensive to use, and it was so much easier and so much more secure than trying to haggle and bargain with a regular taxi driver. So those are the kinds of things that you can find out from what other people have experienced, and they're willing to share, just as I'm willing to share my experiences with you now. So those are the kinds of things I can't stress enough about cultural research, how important it is. Look into the religion, look into the customs, look into their history, just in terms of the things that have gone on. Many countries in the world have had thousands of years of being conquered and ruled by other foreign nations and those kinds of things. And if you have a little bit of an understanding of that, I think it'll be a much greater enhancement for you. Question 4. Of all the things that I saw in Egypt, what surprised me? What did I learn that I didn't know before? And what was my favorite local food? Okay, so we've got a couple of different things in there. I think what surprised me more than anything about the things that I saw in Egypt was actually the advancement of much of what I saw that was, in some cases, 3,500 years old. How construction projects and things and the building of the pyramids and how they moved extremely, heavy stonework, and not just, across town, or some of those stones came from, southern Egypt, Aswan, that's 800 or 900 miles away, and they were moved, and how they, developed all of these things with, without what we would consider modern technology. So I think that was the biggest surprise. What did I learn that I didn't know before? I think one of the biggest things that surprised me was, if you know your William Shakespeare and the story of Julius Caesar, there was a big prominence in the city of Alexandria, because that was run by the Romans starting in 336 BC, I believe. But if you know the story of Julius Caesar, you remember the character of Brutus. And Brutus, in this particular story, was portrayed as a betrayer of Julius Caesar and was sort of forced on the run. And really became kind of a sub-story of the overall concept of Julius Caesar and how the first Roman emperor came into existence and so forth. Brutus was actually the leader and ruler of Alexandria for quite a period of time, and this whole area was completely skipped over in terms of the Shakespeare version of it. And then I had to go back and realize that Shakespeare was really a play, and it wasn't actually history. But sometimes we have a tendency to view these things as actual history, and it wasn't. It was a play. And the character of Brutus was very different in that play than what was explained to me by Sharif, my guide, in terms of his prominence and his leadership in the city of Alexandria for a great period of time, and his rise into a global power at that time. So I think that was very, very surprising to me. In terms of my favorite local food, I would have to say that I really liked falafel. I had never really had it before, although it's usually available in some Mediterranean restaurants here in America. I really liked falafel. I really liked their diet, which consists of a large amount of vegetables. Cucumbers and tomatoes are king there. So everything gets served with cucumbers and tomatoes, which I happen to like. So that was fine with me. Usually with a little balsamic vinegar or some element of spices included in that. And that's generally what they consider to be a green salad. A couple of things that I did try: kofta, which is sort of a lamb-based meat, which was very good. And then, of course, they have the chicken and the beefs. No pork at all. I was, reminded about that, and from an Islamic standpoint, there was no pork. So that was really kind of cool to see beef bacon and beef sausage. But that's how they presented it. So, and of course, the Egyptian diet also has a lot of bread products, a lot of pastries. Naan is a big bread product there, but all kinds of different rolls and things of that. But I'd probably say that falafel was the one that was really kind of a local food that I liked. I did try some of their different sauces, the tahini, the hummus. One that I didn't care for is called, I think they pronounce it foul, but it's actually spelled in what we would term foul, F-O-U-L, and it's a fava bean, sort of whipped up fava beans with some olive oil. I just didn't care for that particular thing, but overall the food was great. And I definitely would recommend it. It's the first trip that I've ever taken internationally where I did not have or did not eat at one Western style restaurant. Even though McDonald's and KFC were there, I did not stop at any of them and stuck to Egyptian food the entire time. Question 5. Did I learn a little of their language while I was there, and was communicating with others difficult? I hate to say that I did not spend as much time on language, the Arabic language, as I probably should have. I unfortunately tended to rely on Google Translate a little more than I should, because Google Translate was extremely effective for me in Russia last year. The one thing I will say about language is if you learn just a couple of phrases and a couple of words, really, one of them being please, the other being thank you. So I've, using the word shukran constantly, which is thank you in Arabic, goes such a long way. Having said that, I did have a little bit of problems communicating in some aspects. When I had Sharif with me, it was a tremendous help because, of course, he translated and he was able to help me not only communicate effectively, but he also helped me bargain for things that I wanted to buy and make sure that I wasn't overpaying for souvenirs and items that I wanted to purchase. So it was an extremely huge benefit to having that guide there. Had I not had him, I probably would have been forced to do a little bit more research, and I should have. I did for Russia, and I took an entire course in Chinese when I went to China a few years ago. So that was one area I was not probably as good about learning the languages as I should have been, mainly because I relied on the technology and the smartphone and Google Translate and all these other things to actually do the work for me, and that's not necessarily a good thing. But in this instance, that's how it kind of turned out. What was my most favorite / unexpected thing that I saw being there, and why? Well, I would say probably the most favorite thing, of course, would be, and I don't think this would be much of a surprise, would be to see the pyramids. And just because they are what they are, the only ancient wonder of the world that is still standing. Then I got to see it at night with the light show, which was fantastic, watching the pyramids light up in different colors, the Sphinx lighting up in different colors. And yes, it's kind of a promotional Western thing to sort of, I guess, take advantage of a piece of history, but it was still amazing nonetheless to see. My hotel where I was just perfectly placed that I could watch from the rooftop terrace restaurant and just sit back and marvel at that. And also the sunset that I got to see. I got to see amazing sunsets and sunrises. But that was probably the most spectacular thing that I saw, just given its history, given the location and how close I was to it, and the amazing aspects that I saw and learned from it. The most unexpected thing probably happened in the city of Alexandria, where Sharif took me to the Roman Amphitheater. And it was really interesting because he showed me the way the amphitheater was designed and how the acoustics worked. And I did this in one of the videos. I actually did this demonstration where just by standing in a certain spot, the way your voice emits a frequency was actually designed to amplify your voice just by the design of the stones in the amphitheater. And standing 12 inches away, you wouldn't hear anything. And then when I stood on this particular area and was talking, you could actually hear my voice amplified much greater than it was previously. No electricity, no fancy microphones, none of that stuff. This was strictly sheer design and all a part of natural elements of the frequency that your voice carries and how it projects off of the stones and rolls back into a much fuller sound. So that was probably something I would not have expected, and no technology whatsoever in order to make it happen. Did I find Egypt to be expensive or inexpensive? Egypt as a whole is extremely inexpensive to travel to, particularly with an American dollar. Your money goes really, really very far. Just to give you an idea, the currency in Egypt is the Egyptian pound. These are two 10-pound notes. This is a total of 20 pounds. And that often we immediately equate that to what our $20 would be. This is the equivalent of about $1.20, 20 pounds, because when I was there it was about 16 Egyptian pounds equals $1. So in many cases this is the currency that they'll use. Although there are some places, some higher end retail places, they will take American dollars. They'll convert it for you. You'll know what your conversion rate is. But if you happen to be short on Egyptian money and you have U.S. dollars, they'll take U.S. dollars as well. And I didn't feel that there was any kind of in any of the instances where I did pay with U.S. dollars. There were a couple that I did, but I didn't feel that they were taking advantage of me in that respect and giving me a rather poor exchange rate. I think because I knew what the exchange rate was going to be, and I was going to, stay in that area. I wasn't going to, vary from an extreme exchange rate just for the sake of paying with U.S. dollars. One thing important, credit cards are not overly accepted in most places there. Retail places, hotels, yes, but they do not, most of the vendors and markets and things, they do not take credit cards. Even if venues to go into do not accept credit cards, like the Egyptian Museum, and to go into the Giza necropolis for the pyramids, it all has to be local currency. Now, having said that, there's ATMs probably at every block on the streets. ATMs were not a problem. Getting places to actually accept credit card for payment was a much greater challenge. So that would be something to keep into consideration. So you always want to have Egyptian currency, and if you can, try to get smaller notes like 50s and 20s. I don't know that I'd necessarily go lower than 20s, but because of the tipping and a lot of the locals, when they perform services, they want to be tipped. And if you get caught where you only have 100 or 200 pound notes, and then you're going to end up tipping them about $6, anywhere from $6 to $14, depending upon the exchange rate. So that would be one thing I would keep in mind for doing that. Other than that, in terms of inexpensive, pretty much everything. The most I paid for any hotel room in Egypt was $48 a night, and that was at the Hilton in Luxor, which was the nicest property in the city. My hotel overlooking the Giza necropolis and the light show and everything was $42 a night. The hotel in the Red Sea, ocean view room, sea view room, was $32 a night. That was a Hilton in Sharm el-Sheikh. So it's extremely inexpensive to travel there right now. Food is relatively inexpensive, particularly if you're going to local establishments. Even if you go to small places, small convenience stores, and you're purchasing like sodas and waters and snacks, all very, very inexpensive. My train ride from Luxor back to Cairo on my final day was a 10-hour train ride. I bought a first-class ticket for $16. Even flying was relatively inexpensive, considering. So overall, it's a very, very inexpensive place to go. You get a good value for your money, and I would highly recommend that. And my last question was, what cultural differences did I like that they have and that we do not? I think one of the most impressive elements about Egypt, and I experienced this in Russia too, was that all of the elements that encourage learning about your culture and your history, museums, the pyramids, necropolis, all of those elements that are focused on educating people are very, very inexpensive. I spent the entrance into the Egyptian Museum was about $7.50. Now this is one of the top 5 museums in the world, and it was $7.50. And if you happen to be an Egyptian citizen, it costs you about $1.50 to enter. And it's the same thing with the pyramids. Everything is designed so that people can afford, even tourists, they can afford to experience and learn about the history. But even more so, if you're a citizen of that country, they want you to experience that. Now imagine going into I'm quite sure, I haven't been to it, but I'm quite sure the Getty Museum here out in Simi Valley is not $7.50. I think I went to the Holocaust Museum with my daughter a couple years ago, and that was, we thought we got a good deal at over $20 per person for admittance to that. All of the attractions are extremely inexpensive. Imagine a $7.50 entry into a place like Disneyland or all of the other things here. We simply don't encourage that, and I really wish that we would encourage that for our citizenry as well as tourism to come and see. But in kind of a capitalistic society here, we tend to try to get as much money for those sorts of things as we can. I really wish that we would change some of that a little bit and focus more. So from a cultural perspective, I think that was the one thing that I really wish we would do more of. that I really liked there, and I did see that in Russia as well. I don't really recall that too much as much in China, but definitely places in Russia were financially friendly to visit, and you are encouraged to visit as the citizens as well as guests in the country. So that pretty much concludes the questions that I got. I want to thank everybody for sending them to me, and if anybody ever has any questions that you want to ask, please just send me a private message. I'll be happy to answer them as quickly as I can. I would encourage everyone to if you have an opportunity to travel and see some of these other places, the big tips would be to do your own research. Do not rely on any media to provide you information on whether it's safe or not, because they're not giving you accurate information. They're giving you a political narrative. And just be prepared for the unexpected. This particular trip, I had a couple of things that canceled on me that I was looking forward to do. There was nothing I could do to change it. You just have to accept it and make the best of whatever happens in that situation. But when you do your own research, you can anticipate some things happening, and you can develop backup plans as well. If you like this content, you like any of the other videos, and I hope you had an opportunity to see those other videos, whether it be just the photographic videos of the photos I took, or the documentary series in the 4 parts that I put together. I'd encourage you to check those out. I know some of them are a little bit long, but they're so worth seeing, and actually kind of walking in my footsteps, the things that I learned. But if you like all this content and you want to see some more, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and then don't forget to click on that notification bell, because that's what will notify you when I upload new content. You'll get a little notification via email saying that there's been a new video added or whatever I've put out there. So I appreciate the support. Hope you had a good time, and more to come.